Hey guys, it is Chris Niccolls here from Bow River Troutfitters, and in our educational videos, we've talked about setting up fly reels, we've talked about tippet, we've talked about knots, we've talked about a lot of stuff, but now I want to talk about this. These little accessories that we might use in our fly fishing rigs. Now, we've got tippet rings here, we've got swivels, and we've got twist clips. We just happen to be showing you the Rio stuff, but there's all sorts of brands out there. You can go anywhere and get these little pieces. I know this is really popular with spin fishing, but what about in fly fishing? Well, I'm going to explain that to you today. Okay, so let's talk about swivels first. Now, in traditional fishing, we use swivels as a way to avoid line twists. With fly fishing, it's not as big a concern because we're dealing more with just leaders and then the tippet coming off that leader. It's just less line to manage. But if you are casting like air-resistant flies, larger streamers, maybe pike flies and things like that, it can help to keep things from getting a little bit twisted up. What we really like about swivels is that they actually add weight. So if you're going to use this in a nymph rig, like an indicator rig, or if you use this for streamer fishing, it does add just a little bit of weight to get things down a little bit more. Sometimes to the point where you don't even need to use split shot. The other cool thing that it does is provide an attachment point that you can then tie off lighter tippet from. So for example, if I'm streamer fishing, I might want to use a really heavy leader section, something with good strength, tie it to one end of the swivel, then the other end of the swivel, I can tie my lighter tippet. Now, as I'm changing flies and that tippet gets eaten away, I can always just cut back to the swivel as a new starting point, tie more tippet and keep going, rather than go through my tapered leaders and find that they just get shorter and shorter and shorter and need to be retied. Okay, so we've talked about swivels and how they provide that handy attachment point that you can have other lines of tippet coming off of. We've also talked about how they're heavy. And so that brings us now to tippet rings. This is just a simple stainless steel ring. You can get these in larger 3mm sizes or smaller 2mm sizes, just depending on how thick a tippet you want to use and what application you're using it for. Unlike swivels, these are not going to add any major weight to your rig. In fact, a lot of the smaller rings, water tension will keep them floating, so you don't even have to worry about them dragging your rig down, but they still give you that very small attachment point that you can have lines of tippet coming off to, and they are less obvious to the fish. These are very useful for things like nymph rigs, either Euro nymphing or indicator nymph rigs. They provide a handy attachment point to have other lines of tippet coming off if you want to have multiple nymphs on one line. And they're also a great way, again, just to save your leaders from getting damaged over time by having that additional tippet that you can have going off the ring. So the last thing I want to talk about is completely different. This is basically like your locking snaps for changing flies quickly. Rio makes something that's intended for fly fishing called twist clips. Again, just a very quick way to attach a fly to the end of your leader without having to tie a knot. I do feel like the application for these is pretty limited. I mean, you can get these in different sizes, but I do not recommend using these for dry flies or nymphs or anything like that. They're just too obvious to the fish. Unless I was fishing for something that's like a species that's very easy to catch, maybe if you're fishing with your kids and you don't want to have to constantly change knots for them, but otherwise in most applications, I wouldn't use them. Where I find these particularly useful for fly fishing is when I go pike fishing and I put these on the end of my wire bite tippet. That metal wire, I don't want to be retying that every time. In fact, I can just crimp them permanently onto the end of these twist clips, and then I can quickly change large flies for pike, trying up different patterns and different colors. They're a good example of a fish that really doesn't care if they see a little bit of that metal in front of the fly because they're so aggressive, and I find it very useful on a day of fishing without having to tie new knots. But for most situations, don't worry about these. Just get really good at making loop knots. All right, I hope you guys found that useful and educational. I just want to show you some of these peripheral accessories that are on the market that can help you with your fishing rigs. But I really want you to think of these as useful conveniences. Do you need to buy these? No, absolutely not. I mean, it's just about finding if this would make your life a little bit easier when you're fly fishing, whether it be useful to you or not. A lot of just good knot knowledge will let you replicate a lot of the stuff they're doing here. I mean, if you're comfortable tying tippet to your leaders properly as they get, cut back, then absolutely, that's a great way to do it. If you're comfortable doing tag ends off of your blood knots, for example, to tie in additional nymphs, great, go for it. There's so many different ways to rig up your stuff, but some of these accessories might be very useful for you just as a way to add additional tippet or to save your leaders and make them last longer or to change large flies on the go in a quicker fashion. So leave your comments below. Let us know what you think. We always appreciate the feedback, but otherwise, thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you soon with more at BowRiverTroutfitters.com.